Burning Point.
Hello and welcome to the show with me, Ekaterina Kudashkina. Ukraine still remains in the limelight as the radical right sector threatened to withdraw from the conflict zone in eastern Ukraine and start moving toward the Ukrainian capital. However, the biggest mystery was the hysterical reaction to Russia, sending 270 trucks with almost 1,800 tons of medical supplies, food, baby food, sleeping bags and other basic necessities as humanitarian aid to the southeast of Ukraine, the region which is currently in a state of humanitarian catastrophe. So, why the hysterical reaction? And this is something we have asked our guest speaker Kirill Koktysh, political analyst, who is based with MGIMO University in Moscow, Russia.
There are several reasons, at least several reasons can be mentioned. First of all, that the Kyiv government wants to, from one side, the humanitarian catastrophe could be one of the strategy of the Kyiv to get victory over the southeast of Ukraine. So probably this humanitarian aid was just the ruining of such plans. Second reason that Kyiv obviously would like to provide humanitarian aid by himself and only to the territories that already are controlled by Kyiv, but not to the territories that are out of control. That's just continuation of the logic of the first reason. So Kyiv would like to be the only hand that can distribute aid, and Russians' aid under this logic would be considered like a challenge, like a cancellation of this strategy. Well, obviously the other reasons are propaganda reasons, because Kyiv used this case to mobilize the Western community against Russia and to reconfirm that Russia's participation in Ukraine conflict is only military participation. So Kyiv tried to convince Europe, along with the United States, that humanitarian aid is the reason of the Russian intrusion, but nothing else. And when these accusations were not confirmed, all these companies stopped. So one of the confirmation was it was only propaganda reasons, just an attempt to bite Russia one more time, but nothing more.
So I get you right that you're saying that the ultimate goal, not of Kyiv, of course, but of the United States, is creating humanitarian catastrophe in the southeast of Ukraine. Is my understanding correct?
Well, this is, could be the reason when you are not able to get a victory through military terms and by usual military tools. So humanitarian catastrophe could be one additional tool that putting the people in the nightmare when they are lacking food, lacking electricity, lacking water, and just the nightmare that just giving up could be considered like a way out of this nightmare. So this could be one of the strategy and argument how to persuade Southeast to live alone with Kyiv on conditions of Kyiv.
Do you think that the public in the West is aware of what's going on there?
Well, as European public regards, I guess it is. There is started to be shifting in the way in which Ukraine crisis is being perceived and how this information is combined with the usual pictures about that Europeans already, it seems to me, they understood that things are not as simple as they are presented. There should be not only arguments, but also, and not only opinions, but also facts. And there is a problem that Western propaganda lacking facts, but relies mostly on the opinions and more or less free interpretation. But this interpretation could not correlate with the reality as it is and as it happens. So it seems to me that this shift already started as long as the Europeans would face the necessity to pay for the Ukrainians. This necessity obviously would come in several next months because Ukraine is moving to the financial default and actual catastrophe during this winter, because it will be a winter when Ukraine itself would be lacking gas, electricity and coal. So it could be energy collapse, what is Ukraine would face, and of course Europeans would be proposed to pay for Ukrainian bills. So it seems to me as this necessity would be closer, the reflection of the Ukrainian development would be more and more critical. And when the Ukrainians would start to reflect how would look for facts rather than for opinions. Because when you're just figuring out, like football fan, what team would you prefer, it's one thing. And when you're paying for this and paying for your choice, it's a rather different thing. So it seems to me that moving from the niche of football fan to the niche of payer, the Europeans would think more and more and would be more and more critical as Ukrainian development regards.
Dr. Koktysh, thank you so much. And just to remind you, our guest speaker was Kirill Koktysh, political analyst based with MGIMO University in Moscow, Russia. This is Burning Point. We're discussing humanitarian catastrophe in the southeast of Ukraine. And now with the European perspective, here is Mateusz Piskorski, head of the European Center for Geopolitical Analysis in Poland.
Yes, trying to hide the fact that they do not control the situation on their, let's say, de jure territory of Ukraine. They do not control units of different extremist and radical forces. They do not control the battalions and brigades which are participating in the operation in the southeast of the country. And they do not control politically the large mass of those who were supporting the so-called Euromaidan before, which means the right sector and other radical groups. But of course, on the other hand, all the public opinion, all the international opinion knows perfectly that those forces are somehow politically linked and connected to what has happened in Ukraine. That's why perhaps Ukrainian authorities not controlling anything are trying to hide the facts, and on the other hand they are trying to, let's say, save their image as this side of the conflict which is being attacked and which is being pressed by Russian Federation. So this is a kind of politics which do not have any real connection to the military and political reality of Ukraine, but I guess that this is another kind of information war which is what will hide those facts which might be, let's say, quite a burden for Ukrainian authorities.
The mere fact that this statement that they are not going to disclose, perhaps they are not going to disclose the results of the investigation, doesn't it make you think that perhaps those results are not actually playing into the hands of the Ukrainian government and the U.S.?
Well, we can be more than sure that the Ukrainian side hasn't any kind of evidence which could point at the fighters, the southeast of Ukraine, the so-called separatists or volunteers, and as well as they do not have evidence which would point out at Russia's participation in what has happened with the Malaysian bank. And it was quite obvious from the very beginning. I'd like just to remind the fact that on the one hand, they have, just after this tragedy, they have claimed that without any doubt this is the tragedy caused by, let's say, the pro-Russian or Russian side of the conflict. And on the other hand, a few days after what has happened, the representatives of American intelligence, who are of course closely cooperating and coordinating their Ukrainian partners and allies, claimed that there is no evidence which would clearly show who is guilty of what has happened with the Malaysian airplane. So from the very beginning, we know that the American side and the Ukrainian side, which is, of course, just fulfilling the orders of the American side, of their American sponsors, doesn't have any slightest evidence for their accusations against Russia and against the forces of Novorossiya. So we can say that probably, and of course that's a hypothesis only, but probably they themselves feel quite guilty of what has happened, of the whole tragedy, and that's why they hide the facts, although all the international opinion, all the, let's say, international organizations, as well as the families of the victims of those people who died, should have the right to know publicly the results of all the investigation. The investigation should be an independent one, but nevertheless, the Ukrainians are definitely hiding something. At least they are hiding the fact that the pro-Russian and Russian forces, Russian side, did not have any connection with what has happened.
Our guest speaker is Dr. Mateusz Piskorski, head of the European Center for Geopolitical Analysis in Poland.
Burning Point.
Last week, Amnesty International published a report on Afghanistan, on civilian casualties. And these people sounded quite indignant over the fact that in 13 years of counterterrorism operation in Afghanistan, 1,800 civilians were killed. Now, we have the southeast of Ukraine where more than 2,000 have been killed in less than 4 months. Is there any kind of awareness in Europe about the scope of crime which is being committed there?
The problem in Europe is that most of the media, most of the European media, as well as most of the American media, are just repeating the propaganda used in the information war by Kiev authorities, which means that they show everything in a very one-sided way, and they present only those, let's say, facts or propaganda issues which are used by the Kiev authorities. And that's why in Europe almost no one discusses, for instance, the humanitarian tragedy of the southeast of Ukraine. Almost no one is aware of what is going on there when it comes to civilian casualties. And of course, if we would compare Afghanistan and even Iraq with Ukraine when it comes to the media coverage in the West, we could say that we in European Union, in Western countries, we knew much more about the civilian casualties in Afghanistan and in Iraq than we know now about, than we hear now in our media about the casualties, civilian casualties in the southeast of Ukraine. So this is a matter of information war. This is a matter of the fact that unfortunately all the European Union countries are now participating in this war, somehow supporting the American-Ukrainian point of view, and just block all the information which would bring some news about the civilian victims of the whole conflict in Ukraine. I would give you one example. For instance, there was an exhibition of some photos covering the tragic events in Odessa on the 2nd of May in several European cities. Nevertheless, I would say that no one state-owned media, no one, let's say, establishment mainstream media was interested to see it and to cover the topic as such. So from the very beginning, since several months, the Western media are definitely participating in a war on information. This is a war, and this is not, let's say, fulfilling their duty and their mission of informing the people and informing the society about what is really going on in the southeast of Ukraine. But this is just a war. When it comes to the civilian casualties, civilian victims of the conflict in Ukraine, I'm more than sure that the situation there is even more tragic than it was in several Middle East or Central Asian countries before. The countries which you have mentioned, because from the very simple point of view, because people there are besieged in large cities, in large urban and industrial areas, which means that using, let's say, missiles and even as we hear, ballistic missiles against densely populated urban areas might bring more and more civilian victims, civil casualties. And it seems that Ukrainian authorities, that the authorities from Kiev are just now trying to clear all the territory, which means to, let's say, organize a kind of ethnic thing, press the population, the local population with their permanent attacks, with their permanent bombings, just to leave the territory and to head towards Russia, what is actually already going on. So I guess that this is the main goal of the so-called anti-terrorist operation, to clean the territories so as to, let's say, to get the control over the territory, not over the people, because all those people who have witnessed all the tragedies of the so-called anti-terrorist operation would hardly agree to live in Ukrainian state, which is governed by Kiev elites who have committed all those crimes.
Dr. Piskorski, thank you so much. And just to remind you, this time our guest speaker was Mateusz Piskorski, head of the European Center for Geopolitical Analysis. Well, and now we end this edition of Burning Point, brought to you by me, Ekaterina Kudashkina. Thank you so much for staying with us. Goodbye, and take care.